Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at the 243 Winchester and we'll compare that to the 6mm Creedmoor. Now it's important to realize right up front that the 243 began right around 1955, so it's been with us for well over 60 years now. And in that time there's been a lot of different bullet weights invented and tried and true for the 243. And those bullet weights start off with right around 55 grain and they move right on up to about 100 grain. If you want to shoot heavier than a 100 grain bullet, like a 105 or a 109, 112, you'll need to hand load for it, and you may even need to change out your barrel. And that's because most 243s come with a 1 in 10 twist to accommodate that wide range of bullet weight from 55 up to 100 grains. But when it starts getting heavier than 100 grains, they don't stabilize them quite as well as what you might want them to do. So you might need to change up the barrel, get into a 1 in 8 barrel twist, or 1 in 8 rifling twist, I should say. Now, the 6mm Creedmoor, on the other hand, got its start right around 2007. So it's been with us for a little over 10 years now. And even though the bullets start off with 80 grain and they move on up to about 112 grain, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't make sense to shoot an 80 or a 90 grain 6mm Creedmoor. You can already do that with a 243. So if you're going to be going with the Creedmoor, it's probably because you're wanting to shoot a 105 or a 109 grain bullet, and you don't want to have to do any reloading. You don't want to have to change out your barrel. You want to just purchase a rifle that already has the right rifling twist, the 1 in 8. And the ammo is just loaded up from the factory like these are. These are Berger 109 grain. What do they say? They say long range hybrid target. We'll take a look at those in a moment as well. So if you want like a no muss, no fuss, long range rifle caliber, maybe the 6mm Creedmoor is the way to go. We'll run some different tables today and kind of compare and contrast and see which one of those might be better for your needs. So if you like today's video, please remember to click the like button. Do subscribe and turn on the notifications icon if you haven't already done so. And we're definitely looking forward to your comments. Thank you again. Okay, I've included a few extra cartridges here just for the sake of reference. On your far left, you've got your 223 Remington. That happens to be a 55 grain VMAX bullet sitting on top. You have another 55 grain VMAX bullet, but this one is sitting on top of a 22 250. Here is another 55 grain bullet. This one is the Winchester Ballistic Silver Tip, of which we will be comparing today. This one is in 243, of course, and as you can see, the 243 more or less is starting to pick up right about where the 22 250 leaves off. Here we've got a 65 grain ballistic tip sitting on top of another 243. That'll be on our comparisons today. And then lastly, you've got your 6mm Creedmoor. That is a 109 grain bullet by Berger that is sitting on top. Berger calls that their long-range hybrid target bullet. Okay, what you're looking at now is the bullets that have been pulled off of these three. On your left, you've got the 55 grain Winchester Ballistic Silver Tip bullet. You've got your 65 grain ballistic tip. Both of those have been pulled off of a 243. Here you have your 109 grain Berger that's been pulled off of the 6mm Creedmoor. And part of why we're doing that is because I want to talk about case capacity for a moment. We are being told that the 243 has a little bit more case capacity than the 6mm Creedmoor. We're being told that it has about 4 grains water more. What they mean by that is this. If you were just to take this empty casing, fill it up with water, empty it into a small little cup and measure it on a digital scale, whatever number you get there, you would do the same exercise on your 6mm Creedmoor, measure that amount of water, you would find that you have about 4 grains heavier worth of water from that cartridge right there. But that's a little bit misleading. That doesn't necessarily mean that the 243 has more case room in real life. Could you imagine for a moment if you were to try to take that 243, or I'm sorry, if you were to try to take that 6mm 109 grain Berger and make it fit nicely inside of that 243 case? Don't you think that it would kind of eat away at your case capacity because of the length of the bullet? Whereas on the 6mm Creedmoor, you can see how they're making it sit more on the outside of the case, which leaves room for case capacity. So as far as I'm concerned, it's probably a dead heat in terms of true case capacity, with maybe even a slight edge to the Creedmoor, but probably not enough to argue about either way. Okay, here's the two casings by themselves for a moment. On the left is the 243, on the right is the 6mm Creedmoor. You'll notice that the 243 is a little bit taller, and pay attention for a moment to the shoulder. The 243 has a 20-degree shoulder, the 6mm Creedmoor has a 30-degree shoulder. Why does that matter? Why do we need to pay attention to that? Well, what we've been told, anyway, is that the 6mm Creedmoor, with its 30-degree shoulder, causes the round to be a little bit more fuel efficient, for lack of a better analogy. In other words, it would take a little bit less gunpowder in the 6mm Creedmoor to achieve the identical velocity if you're pushing the same weight bullet on each of the two cartridges. Or, if you want to look at it a different way, let's say you want to shoot a 100-grain bullet in each of those, and you were to use the exact same brand of powder and the exact same amount of powder in each. They claim that you would have about 150 feet per second faster moving bullet at the muzzle on the 6mm Creedmoor. Alright, so here's the bullets themselves that we're going to be comparing today. We're going to start off with the 109-grain Burger bullet from the 6mm Creedmoor, and on our first comparison we'll compare it to that 55-grain and 65-grain bullet from the 243, and then we'll compare that 6mm Creedmoor to a 95-grain bullet 243. Now this bullet here is not a 95-grain bullet 243 VLD that we're going to be comparing today. I don't have one of those to show you. This bullet is actually just a 77-grain bullet pulled off of a 223, but I would suspect that the 95-grain bullet will just be a little bit taller than what you're seeing here, and it'll be a little bit shorter than that 109-grain. So I at least wanted to have something there so that you could kind of use your imagination from there. Okay, what you're looking at here is a chart that's going to show the two lighter bullets that are 243. You've got your 55-grain Winchester ballistic silver tip. You've got your 65-grain ballistic tip by Browning. We're going to compare that to the 6mm Creedmoor 109-grain hybrid target round. Here are your ballistic coefficients. You've got a BC of 0.267 on your 55-grain, 0.28 on your 65, and 0.568 on that Creedmoor round. Now it's worth noting though that the Creedmoor round has a lower starting velocity, 2950 feet per second compared to 3400 feet per second on your 65-grain bullet, and 3910 feet per second on that 55-grain bullet by Winchester. So that's almost 1,000 feet per second faster at the start. So let's see how far down range we would need to go before this ballistic coefficient right here helps that Creedmoor round to catch up. It certainly hasn't caught up at 100 yards. It has not caught up at 200 yards, but at 200 yards it's worth noting that you've got 668 foot-pounds of energy on the Creedmoor round compared to only 1,051 foot-pounds of energy on your 65-grain bullet and 1166 on the 55-grain. Once you get out there to about 300 yards, now you have caught up in terms of speed. You've got 2471 feet per second on the Creedmoor compared to only 2386 feet per second on that 65-grain bullet, but you're still lagging behind the 55-grain bullet on the 243. In terms of what else we might want to look at 300 yards, keep in mind that we've got the drop and the wind calculated in here today. I factored in a 10-mile-an-hour cross breeze, 90-degree angle left to right. So I always like to ask myself, what am I gaining, what am I giving up? If you want to use that 65-grain bullet and you're at 300 yards, here's what you're gaining. You've got 1.64 inches less drop than what you would have on your Creedmoor round. So it's a little bit flatter shooting. So you're gaining 1.64. What are you giving up? 4.13 inches more wind drift is what you're giving up though. Maybe not a good trade-off. How about at 300 yards for the 55 grain bullet? A little better ratio here. As you can see, 6.44 inches of drop compared to 1105, 8.13 inches rather on the drift compared to 5.03. So here's what that means. You're gaining in the sense that you're going to have 4.61 inches less drop, and you're going to give up only 3.1 inches more wind drift at that distance. So not a bad trade-off at all. What about it out there at 500 yards for the 65 grain bullet? Here you're clinging to maybe a slightly flatter shooting bullet. Out there you'll have a nominal advantage. You'll have 1.14 inches less drop than if you were in the Creedmoor. But what kind of a price will you pay for that 1.14 inches less drop? You're going to have 13.95 inches more in terms of wind drift. How about at the 500 yard range with the 55 grain bullet? A little better ratio here. As you can see, you've got 31.96 inches of drop compared to 45.03. You've got 25 inches of wind drift compared to 14.77. So here's how the math works out on that. You're going to gain in the sense that you'll have 13.07 inches less drop. The price you'll pay, 10.46 more inches of wind drift. In terms of where will this 65 grain bullet finally be eclipsed in terms of drop, somewhere around 600 yards is where that 109 grain Creedmoor cartridge will finally eclipse it, and it'll be flatter once you hit 600 yards and onward. Once you get out there to about 800 to 850 yards, that 65 grain bullet will be dropping below the speed of sound in that neighborhood. Where will it drop below the speed of sound on the 55 grain bullet? Somewhere between 900 to 950 yards. And if you want to take a look at that 900 yard mark, you'll notice that you're still a little bit flatter shooting with that 55 grain bullet than what you are with your 109 grain Creedmoor. You got 206 inches of drop compared to 210. However, right when you get around, 925, 930, 940 yards, somewhere in there, that's where the amount of drop becomes a virtual dead heat. All right, in this table here, we're going to be comparing the 243 Winchester. This is the HSM factory loaded bullet. They're using a 95 grain Berger VLD, which I believe stands for very low drag. Ballistic coefficient 0.486 compared to the 109 grain bullet by Berger, ballistic coefficient 0.568. Now you do have a little bit better starting speed on the 243. You've got 3174 feet per second compared to 2950 on the Creedmoor. In terms of how these perform, at 500 yards and closer, I'm giving the edge to the 243, and here's why. It's going to be flatter shooting, and you're not going to really give up that much in terms of wind, or wind drift, I should say. For example, at 500 yards, if you're going to stay with the 243, you'll find that you're 5.33 inches flatter at 500 yards. And what will that cost you in terms of wind drift? Only 1.2 inches in terms of wind drift. That's almost a 5-to-1 ratio in your favor if you stay in the 243 at that distance. However, if you move past that distance, when you look right around 7, let's call it, looks like about 800 yards, and move that up a little bit for you. At about 800 yards, that is when the 6mm Creedmoor starts to overtake that 243 bullet in terms of speed, and it never looks back after that point. However, when you get out there to 1,000 yards, you're still flatter in that 243. At 1,000 yards, if you were to stay with that 243 bullet, you will be 18.75 inches flatter shooting. However, what would that cost you? About 7.25 inches in terms of wind drift. But that's almost a 3-to-1 ratio in your favor if you stay with the 243. But here's where it may really cost you, though, to stay with the 243, just raw energy. You'll have 576 foot-pounds of energy on the Creedmoor round compared to 475 on the 243. That's a difference of 21% more punch with the Creedmoor at 1,000 yards. It gets really interesting after that. Let's move this down a little more. Out there at 1,300 yards, that's about the last place that you're going to see the 243 being above the speed of sound. Right around the neighborhood of 1,350 or so, it drops below the speed of sound. Even out there at 1,400 yards, your Creedmoor round is still above the speed of sound. If you stay with the 243 out there at 1,400 yards, you'll be flatter shooting. You'll be about 13.73 inches flatter. However, it's going to cost you some wind drift. It's going to cost you about 20.5 inches of wind drift. So probably not a good ratio. And also, here's where else it will cost you. The energy numbers. You're going to have 335 foot-pounds of energy on the Creedmoor round compared to 260 foot-pounds on the 243. That's about 29% more foot-pounds on the Creedmoor round at that distance.